Captain Hyunwoo's head pounded as consciousness slowly returned. The last thing he remembered was the blinding flash when his exploration ship had been caught in some sort of energy net. Now, his wrists burned with electric pain from the glowing. Restraints wrapped around them. The air smelled wrong, thick and sweet like overripe fruit mixed with machine oil. As his vision cleared, Hyunwoo found himself in a corridor that defied human engineering. The walls pulsed with soft blue and green lights that seemed to breathe. Everything curved and flowed like the inside of some massive living creature. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Hyunwoo turned to see his captors for the first time, and his breath caught in his throat. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in dark chitinous armor that reflected the corridor's strange light. Multiple arms moved with mechanical precision, while their heads, if you could call them heads, resembled those of giant praying mantises. Sharp mandibles clicked as they communicated in sounds that hurt his ears. One of the creatures prodded him forward with a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. Hyunwoo had no choice but to walk. The corridor seemed to stretch forever, branching off into passages that disappeared into darkness. Other creatures watched from doorways, some smaller, some larger, all equally alien and threatening. The corridor finally opened into a vast chamber that made Hyunwoo's knees weak. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, supported by pillars that looked grown rather than built. Thousands of the insect-like beings filled the space, their collective chittering creating a sound like rushing water. At the chamber's far end sat a structure that could only be described as a throne, though it looked more like a massive flower made of crystal and metal. As Hyunwoo was dragged closer, the crowd fell silent. The crystal petals of the throne began to open, revealing something inside that made his blood run cold. Queen Silvara unfolded herself from the crystalline cocoon like a nightmare coming to life. She towered over even her largest warriors, her 4 arms ending in claws that could slice through steel. Her wings spread wide, catching the chamber's light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. But it was her eyes that held Hyunwoo captive, compound eyes that contained thousands of facets, each one reflecting his image back at him. Those eyes had seen worlds burn, had watched entire species kneel in surrender. They spoke of power beyond human comprehension. The queen leaned forward, studying this strange new prisoner. Her subjects had brought her warriors before, diplomats even, other alien royalty, but this creature was different, small, fragile-looking with soft skin and pathetic single-lens eyes. Yet something about him sent ice through her ancient veins. As her gaze locked onto Hyunwoo's face, Queen Silvara's antennae began to twitch uncontrollably. A memory? No, not a memory. Something deeper, something written in her very genes, screamed danger. Her massive form, which had never shown weakness before any living being, began to tremble. The throne room erupted in confused chittering as their invincible queen staggered backward, her claws scraping against the crystal throne. For the first time in her 1,000-year reign, Silvara felt something she had never experienced: fear. Hyunwoo stood perfectly still, unaware that his mere presence had awakened something in the alien queen that should have remained buried forever. Queen. Silvara's massive claws gripped the edges of her crystal throne as waves of ancient terror washed over her. The human stood there seemingly harmless, but his very presence was like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for millions of years. Deep in her mind, images began to surface, not her own memories, but something far older. The Veltari. Species carried their history in their blood, passed down through genetic memory from one generation to the next. Most of these ancient recollections stayed buried, surfacing only in dreams or moments of extreme stress. But now, staring at Hyunwoo, the memories exploded to life with terrifying clarity. She saw vast fleets of her ancestors' ships, proud and mighty, stretching across star systems like a golden web. The Veltari had once ruled half the galaxy, their empire spanning thousands of worlds. They were conquerors, unstoppable, feared by every species they encountered. Then came the shadows. The memories shifted, and Silvara watched in horror as those same mighty fleets burned. not from superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but from something far worse, creatures that fought like they had read her ancestors' minds. Every strategy, every formation, every desperate last stand had been anticipated and countered with surgical precision. The bipedal beings in the memory moved through space like ghosts, their ships appearing and disappearing without warning. They never fought fair battles. Instead, they struck at supply lines, communication networks, and command centers with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. Worse still, they showed mercy to civilians while systematically dismantling military forces, a combination of ruthlessness and restraint that drove Veltari commanders to madness. In the memory, she watched entire hive cities fall not to bombardment, but to small groups of these shadow creatures, who somehow knew exactly where to strike. They moved through Veltari defenses like water through a broken dam, always one step ahead, always knowing what would come next. The Great Dying had lasted less than 50 years, but in that time, the vast Veltari Empire had crumbled to nothing. Billions of her people had simply vanished, their worlds left empty and silent. The survivors had fled to the furthest reaches of space, spending millennia rebuilding from scattered remnants. Back in the present, Silvara's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her court watched in stunned silence as their invincible queen trembled, like a hatchling. High Advisor Morketh stepped forward, his own mandibles clicking with concern. "My queen, you show distress over a single primitive captive. Perhaps the interrogation chambers would be more appropriate than the throne room." Silvara's compound eyes never left Hyunwoo's face. "Look at him, Morketh. Look carefully at his form, his stance, the way he observes without seeming to observe." The Advisor studied the human with growing confusion. "I see only a weak creature, barely worth our attention." "Then you are blind," Silvara hissed. "Send word to the science cast immediately. I want every detail of this creature's physiology, psychology, and behavioral patterns. Study his species, their technology, their methods of warfare. Leave nothing unexamined. My queen, surely you don't believe this small thing could pose any threat to our empire." Silvara finally tore her gaze away from Hyunwoo, fixing her advisor with a stare that made him step backward. "I believe, old friend, that we are looking at something that should not exist, something that was supposed to be legend." The genetic memories continued to whisper their warnings as she spoke. In her blood, in her very cells, the knowledge of her ancestors screamed the same message over and over. These creatures had nearly wiped the Veltari from existence once before, and now, impossibly, they had returned. The interrogation chamber hummed with alien technology that made Hyunwoo's teeth ache. Royal Inquisitor Mordesh circled around the restraint chair like a predator studying its prey. His forearms moved independently, adjusting various crystalline devices that pulsed with unnatural light. "Your queen seems quite interested in my species," Hyunwoo said calmly, testing his bonds. The energy restraints held firm, but he noticed they responded to movement, tightening when he struggled, loosening when he remained still. Mordesh's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The queen has her cue concerns. I am here to separate fact from paranoid fantasy." He gestured to a crown-like device hovering above Hyunwoo's head. "This neural probe will extract every memory, every piece of knowledge from your primitive mind. Your cooperation is unnecessary." The device descended slowly, its crystalline tendrils reaching toward Hyunwoo's temples. As it made contact, Mordesh activated the probe with confident expectation. He had broken the minds of countless species. Warriors, diplomats, even other psychic races had crumbled before Veltari interrogation technology. The probe's energy poured into Hyunwoo's mind like acid, searching for memories to tear free. Mordesh waited for the usual screams, the begging, the inevitable mental collapse. Instead, Hyunwoo sat quietly, his breathing steady, his expression almost bored. "Interesting," Hyunwoo mused, as if discussing the weather. "Your probe works by amplifying emotional responses to traumatic memories. But you're assuming human minds work like yours." Mordesh increased the power, his confidence wavering. The probe should have reduced the human to a gibbering wreck by now. "Impossible. No mind can resist full neural extraction." Hyunwoo continued conversationally, your mistake is thinking we store information the same way you do. Your species has genetic memory, knowledge passed down through bloodlines, very efficient, but also very predictable. The Inquisitor stepped back, unease creeping into his posture. How could this creature analyze their technology while being tortured by it? Humans are different, Hyunwoo explained, still perfectly calm despite the energy tearing at his mind. We learn through experience, adaptation, and something you might not understand. Imagination. We don't just remember what happened. We constantly think about what might happen. Mordesh frantically adjusted controls, pushing the probe beyond safe parameters. Warning lights flashed across the chamber's walls, but the human remained unaffected. For example, Hyunwoo said, tilting his head slightly, right now you're thinking about calling for backup. But you won't, because that would mean admitting failure to your queen. Instead, you'll try the secondary restraint protocol in about 3 seconds. Mordesh's claw froze halfway to the control panel. The human had just predicted his exact thought process. How did you... Your body language, Hyunwoo replied simply. The way you shifted weight to your left legs, the angle of your primary arms, the frequency of your mandible clicks. Your species might be great conquerors, but you're terrible at hiding your intentions. The interrogation chamber's door hissed open as bridge crew members filed in to observe. They had heard about the failed extraction and came to witness what many thought impossible, a mind that could not be broken. Let me guess what happens next, Hyunwoo said, addressing the growing crowd. Your tactical officer, the one with the scar across his left eye cluster, is going to suggest increasing security. Your weapons specialist will recommend moving me to a more secure facility. And your communications officer is already composing a report to the Queen about this failure. Every alien in the room stepped backward, as Hyunwoo's predictions proved accurate. The scarred tactical officer's mandibles had indeed been moving in the pattern for increased security. The weapons specialist's claws were reaching for her communication device. The fear in the room was almost tangible. The truly frightening part, Hyunwoo continued, his voice gentle but his words cutting deep, is that I'm not reading your minds. I'm not using any special technology. I'm just watching and thinking, something any human can do. Mordesh finally shut down the probe, his hands shaking. In all his years as Royal Inquisitor, he had never encountered a mind like this. The human wasn't just resistant to interrogation, he was turning it into a demonstration of human superiority. What are you? Mordesh whispered. Hyunwoo smiled sadly. I'm just a ship captain who took a wrong turn, but apparently that's enough to terrify an entire empire. The Crimson Pits roared with the voices of 50,000 Veltari spectators, their chittering creating a sound like a massive waterfall. Queen Silvara watched from her royal box as Hyunwoo was dragged into the arena's center. The fighting pit stretched nearly 100 meters across, its red sand stained with the blood of countless battles. My queen, High Advisor Morketh leaned close. Surely this is beneath your attention. Hive Lord Kexeron has never lost a battle. This will be over in seconds. Silvara's compound eyes never left the human below. That is precisely what I fear. Old friend, not that it will be over quickly, but that it will end the way I expect. The crowd's noise died to a whisper as Hive Lord Kexeron entered the arena. Standing 12 feet tall, his exoskeleton bore the scars of 1,000 victories. Forearms rippled with muscle as he hefted his traditional combat claws, curved blades that could slice through steel plating. He was the Empire's greatest warrior, undefeated in 15 years of arena combat. Hyunwoo stood in the center of the pit, wearing nothing but simple prison clothes. No weapons, no armor, no visible means of defense. To the watching crowd, he looked like a sacrifice waiting to happen. Begin. Silvara's voice echoed through the arena. Kexeron charged immediately, his massive form covering ground with frightening speed. His battle cry shook the arena walls as he brought his claws down in a killing strike that should have ended the fight instantly. But Hyunwoo wasn't there anymore. The human had rolled sideways at the last possible moment, his movement so fluid it seemed almost lazy. As Kexeron's claws struck empty sand, Hyunwoo grabbed a handful of the red grit and flung it directly into the warrior's compound eyes. The crowd gasped. In 15 years of arena combat, no one had ever thought to use the sand itself as a weapon. Kexron roared in pain and fury, swinging blindly as he tried to clear his vision. But Hyunwoo was already moving, staying just outside the warrior's reach while studying his opponent's movements. Each wild swing taught him something new about Veltari, anatomy and fighting patterns. "He's learning," Silvara whispered, her claws digging into her throne's armrests. Kexron's vision cleared, and he resumed his attack with more caution. But Hyunwoo had already spotted the warrior's weakness. The Veltari champion was incredibly strong and fast, but his exoskeleton had joints that needed to bend, and where there were joints, there were pressure points. The next time Kexron lunged forward, Hyunwoo didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped inside the warrior's reach and drove, his elbow into the soft spot where the champion's primary arm connected to his torso. The precisely placed strike sent shockwaves through Kexron's nervous system, and his right arm went limp. The arena fell dead silent. No one had ever seen their champion's arm disabled with a single blow. Kexron backed away, clicking his mandibles, in disbelief. He tried to compensate with his remaining 3 arms, but his balance was ruined. Hyunwoo pressed his advantage, staying close where the longer-armed warrior couldn't use his reach effectively. What followed wasn't really a fight. It was a masterclass in human adaptability. Hyunwoo used the arena's scattered debris as tools, turning broken weapons into leverage points and using the pit's walls to change angles of attack. Every move served multiple purposes. Every action flowed into the next, with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. When Kexron tried to use his size advantage by pinning the human against the wall, Hyunwoo turned the warrior's own momentum against him. A perfectly timed throw sent the 12-foot champion crashing into the sand, where Hyunwoo immediately applied a submission hold that no Veltari had ever seen before. "Yield," Hyunwoo said quietly, applying just enough pressure. To make his point clear, Kexron, the Empire's greatest warrior, the undefeated champion of the Crimson Pits, tapped his remaining free claw against the sand in surrender. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours before Queen Silvara slowly rose from her throne. Her worst fears had just been confirmed in the most public way possible. The legends were true, and humanity had returned. The royal chamber felt smaller than usual as Science Cast leader Thelana spread holographic star maps across the crystalline table. Her 6 delicate limbs moved with nervous precision, arranging data that had kept her research team awake for days. Queen Silvara loomed over the display, her compound eyes reflecting the swirling lights of 100 star systems. "My queen," Thelana began, her voice trembling slightly, "what we've discovered about human expansion patterns is deeply troubling." The hologram shifted, showing scattered points of light across several galactic sectors. Each point represented a human colony, outpost, or exploration site. At first glance, they seemed randomly distributed, the natural result of a young species exploring space. "Initially, we assumed their settlements followed typical expansion patterns," Thelana continued, manipulating the display. "Most species spread outward from their home system in predictable waves, establishing colonies along trade routes or near resource-rich worlds." Silvara's antennae twitched impatiently. "But humans are different, remarkably so." Thelana activated another layer of the hologram, and suddenly the seemingly random pattern revealed hidden structure. "Look at the spacing between their settlements, the angles of approach, the way they've positioned themselves relative to major space lanes and communication networks." The Queen studied the display more carefully, and ice began to form in her blood. The human settlements weren't random at all. They formed a web of strategic positions that could control or disrupt interstellar commerce across multiple sectors. "Show. Amici the Forbidden Codex," Silvara commanded. Thelana hesitated. The Forbidden Codex was exactly that, forbidden. Ancient texts that detailed the Empire's greatest shame, locked away in the deepest archives and never spoken of in polite society. But she had no choice. With trembling claws, she activated a second holographic display. "These are the dispersal patterns described in the final military reports from the Great Dying," she whispered. "The positions taken by the Voidbringers before they began their systematic dismantling of our empire." The 2 displays overlapped perfectly. Every human settlement, every exploration route, every trade agreement they had established followed the exact same pattern that had led to the Veltari Empire's near extinction millions of years ago. It was as if humanity was following an ancient playbook, preparing for a war that hadn't started yet. This cannot be coincidence, Silvara breathed, her massive form beginning to shake again. But how is it possible? The Voidbringers vanished completely. Our ancestors searched every corner of the galaxy for survivors. Thelana pulled up genetic analysis data. We've been studying the prisoner's DNA structure. Humans share common ancestry with dozens of species across the galaxy, which suggests their origins lie somewhere in the galactic core regions. But there's something else. The display showed a complex genetic map that hurt to look at directly. Human DNA contains massive amounts of what we initially thought was junk genetic material. But it's not junk at all, it's compressed information. Their entire genetic code is like a vast library, containing knowledge that most species would need centuries to accumulate. Evolutionary memory, Silvara realized with growing horror, like our own genetic consciousness, but far more advanced. Exactly. And based on certain genetic markers, we believe this information was deliberately encoded. Someone wanted humans to remember something specific, even if they weren't consciously aware of it. The truth hit Silvara like a physical blow. The void. Bringers hadn't vanished. They had transformed themselves. Somehow the beings who had nearly destroyed the Veltari Empire had encoded their knowledge, their strategies, their very essence into a new species and sent them out into the galaxy to grow and evolve. The humans don't even know what they are, Thelana continued. They're following patterns encoded in their genes, positioning themselves across the galaxy without understanding why. They think they're explorers, colonists, peaceful traders. But they're not, Silvara finished. They're an invasion force that doesn't know it's an invasion force. The Voidbringers created the perfect weapon, a species that would spread naturally, taking strategic positions, learning about potential enemies, all while appearing completely harmless. The holographic displays flickered as both aliens contemplated the magnitude of their discovery. Humanity wasn't just similar to their ancient enemy. They were their ancient enemy, reborn and improved, more dangerous because they fought without malice, conquered without cruelty, and destroyed empires while genuinely believing they were helping. "My queen," Thelana asked quietly, "what do we do with this knowledge?" Silvara stared at the overlapping patterns for a long moment, watching the slow-motion replay of her species' ancient nightmare. The Voidbringers had returned, and this time they were stronger, smarter, and completely unaware of their own terrible purpose. "We prepare," she finally answered, "and we pray that when they remember what they are, they choose to be something better." The void of space around the Veltari flagship suddenly filled with new contacts as Admiral Jin Ho's rescue fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Queen Silvara rushed to the bridge's main viewport, her compound eyes scanning the human formation with growing unease. Only 12 ships. Fleet Commander Velkoth clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his kind. "My queen, they must be either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. We have over 300 vessels in this sector alone." Silvara said nothing, but her claws gripped the command rail so tightly they left scratches in the metal. The human fleet looked unimpressive, sleek vessels that seemed almost toy-like compared to the massive Veltari dreadnoughts surrounding them. But something about their positioning sent warnings through her genetic memory. "Veltari flagship, this is Admiral Jin Ho of the United Earth Fleet," came the transmission in perfect Veltari dialect. "We're here to retrieve Captain Hyunwoo. Please prepare for his immediate transfer." Fleet Commander Velkoth laughed openly this time. 12 ships making demands of an entire battle fleet? These creatures must be as insane as they are primitive. "Open." "A channel," Silvara ordered reluctantly. Jin Ho's image appeared on the main screen, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and steady eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the informal introduction. Normally we'd follow proper diplomatic protocols, but our missing captain has been gone for over a week. His family is worried." "Your captain is our prisoner," Silvara replied, trying to project authority she no longer felt. He will be released when we determine he poses no threat to our empire. With respect, Your Majesty, that wasn't a request. Jinho's voice remained polite, but something in her tone made every Veltari on the bridge step backward. Captain Hyunwoo has a daughter waiting for him at home. We'd prefer to resolve this peacefully. Fleet Commander Velkoth activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships assume attack formation. These primitives need to understand their situation. The space around the human fleet filled with Veltari warships, massive vessels, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Any sane species would have surrendered immediately, overwhelmed by the impossible odds. Instead, the human ships began to move. What happened next defied everything the Veltari knew about space. Combat. The human vessels didn't accelerate in straight lines or follow predictable attack patterns. They moved like living things, flowing around the Veltari formation in curves that should have been impossible given the laws of physics. How are they maneuvering like that? Velkoth demanded, watching his tactical display with growing alarm. No ship can change direction that quickly without tearing itself apart. One of the human frigates passed directly through the energy field of a Veltari destroyer. Not around it, not over it. Through it, as if the shields weren't even there. Alarms shrieked across the bridge as systems throughout the fleet began failing in sequence. "Sir, they're not firing on us," the weapons officer reported in confusion. "They're somehow disrupting our systems without causing any damage to hull, integrity, or life support." Silvara watched in horrifying fascination as the human ships danced between her fleet's formation, systematically disabling weapons, engines, and communication arrays with surgical precision. They weren't destroying anything. They were demonstrating complete control over Veltari technology while leaving crew members completely unharmed. "Status report," Velkoth shouted as another wave of system failures cascaded through the fleet. 60% of our weapons are offline, but no casualties. "Reported anywhere in the fleet," came the bewildered response. "They're targeting specific components while leaving everything else intact." On the main screen, Admiral Jinho maintained her patient expression. "Your Majesty, we've temporarily disabled your fleet's offensive capabilities as a precautionary measure. Once Captain Hyunwoo is safely aboard our ship, we'll restore all your systems and withdraw from your territory." "Impossible," Velkoth whispered, staring at his useless weapons displays. "No species has technology that advanced. How are they doing this?" Silvara knew the answer, even if she didn't want to admit it. The ancient records spoke of Voidbringer ships that moved like ghosts, that could appear and disappear at will, that could reach through any defense to strike exactly where they chose. Her ancestors had faced this same helpless terror millions of years ago. "The mercy," she breathed, finally understanding. "They could have destroyed us all in the first 30 seconds, but they chose not to. They're showing restraint, not because they have to, but because they want to." Jinho leaned forward slightly. "Your Majesty, we have no quarrel with your people. We simply want our captain back. Surely that's a reasonable request between civilized species." The terrifying truth settled over Silvara like a shroud. The humans weren't just technologically superior. They were so far beyond the Veltari that this entire confrontation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to them. They had disabled an entire battle fleet without breaking a sweat, and they were asking politely for their captain's return as if they were discussing the weather. "Prepare Captain Hyunwoo for transfer," Silvara commanded quietly. "My queen." Velkoth stared at her in shock. "You heard me. Return their captain immediately." Because if humanity could show this level of restraint when they held absolute power, Silvara realized, then her empire's only hope for survival lay in never giving them a reason to stop being merciful. The tension on the Veltari flagship's bridge could be cut with a blade as negotiations stretched into their third hour. Queen Silvara found herself caught between her terrified instincts and the political reality of appearing weak before her own fleet commanders. "Your Majesty," Fleet Commander Velkoth whispered urgently, "we cannot simply hand over our prisoner without some show of strength. The other houses will see this as surrender." Admiral Jinho's image on the main screen remained patient, but Silvara could see something shifting in the human commander's expression. "Your Majesty, I understand your position, but my orders are clear. Captain Hyunwoo returns with us today. And if we refuse," Velkoth interjected before Silvara could respond. Jinho was quiet for a moment, then turned to someone off-screen. "Commander Minsu, would you mind giving our new friends a demonstration of our capabilities? Nothing destructive, just a training exercise." "With pleasure, Admiral," came a younger voice from the communication channel. On the tactical display, one of the smaller human ships, barely the size of a Veltari scout vessel, began moving away from the main formation. The bridge crew watched with a mixture of curiosity and confidence as the tiny frigate positioned itself against their entire defensive fleet. "One ship against 300? Velkoth scoffed. "This should be entertaining." "Begin exercise," Jinho announced calmly. What happened next would haunt every Veltari officer present for the rest of their lives. The human frigate didn't attack in any conventional sense. Instead, it began to move through the Veltari formation like a dancer, performing an impossibly complex routine. The ship flowed between the massive dreadnoughts with movements so precise they seemed choreographed, never quite touching anything, but coming close enough to make veteran pilots hold their breath. "Track that vessel," Velkoth ordered, but his weapons officers were already shaking their heads. "Sir, our targeting systems can't lock onto it. The ship's signature keeps shifting, and its movement patterns don't match any known physics models." The frigate slipped between two capital ships that were positioned less than a kilometer apart, a gap that should have been impossible for any vessel to navigate at that speed. As it passed, both dreadnoughts' main weapon arrays suddenly powered down, their targeting systems displaying error messages. "How did it disable our weapons without firing a shot?" the tactical officer asked in bewilderment. On the main screen, Admiral Jinho smiled slightly. "Commander Minsu has very delicate hands. She's showing you exactly where she could place a torpedo to cripple each of your ships, but she's choosing to simply tag your weapon systems instead." The demonstration continued for another 10 minutes, and it was beautiful in its terrible efficiency. The human frigate moved through the Veltari fleet like a surgeon operating on a patient, touching each vital system just long enough to prove it could be destroyed, then moving on to the next target. Every major vessel in the fleet was tagged within those 10 minutes. Command bridges, engine cores, weapons arrays, life support systems. The frigate demonstrated with clinical precision exactly how it could have killed everyone present a dozen times over. But what truly terrified the watching Veltari wasn't the display of superior technology. It was the restraint. Each time the frigate positioned itself for what should have been a killing blow, it pulled back. Each system it could have destroyed was merely disabled. Each life it could have taken was deliberately spared. "Status report," Velkoth demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every capital ship in the fleet has been compromised, sir. Weapons offline, shields down, engines running at minimum power. But no structural damage anywhere, no casualties. It's like they're playing with us." The human frigate finally returned to its original position, having humiliated the pride of the Veltari military without firing a single shot. On the screen, Admiral Jinho folded her hands calmly. "Your Majesty, I hope that clarifies our position. We could have ended this confrontation in the first 30 seconds, but we'd prefer Captain Hyunwoo to return home, knowing that both our species parted as friends rather than enemies." Silvara stared at the tactical display showing her completely defenseless fleet. Every military advisor, every proud commander, every warrior who had sworn to protect the Empire now understood the same terrible truth. They existed only because humanity allowed them to exist. "The demonstration is over," Jinho continued. "We're restoring your systems now. Full functionality should return within the next few minutes." True to her word, weapons came back online across the fleet, shields strengthened, and engines returned to full power. The humans had given back everything they had taken, as easily as they had taken it in the first place. "Commander Velkoth," Silvara said quietly, "prepare Captain Hyunwoo for immediate transfer." "But Your Majesty, now," her voice carried the weight of absolute authority and absolute fear. "Before they decide our friendship isn't worth maintaining," the message had been received loud and clear. Humanity didn't rule through fear or conquest. They ruled through the far more terrifying concept of choice, and they had just chosen to be merciful. The royal chambers had never felt so empty as Queen Silvara paced alone among the crystalline pillars, her 4 arms trembling with the weight of an impossible decision. Through the vast windows, she could see the human fleet waiting patiently in space, their mere presence a reminder of how powerless her empire had become in a single day. Her advisors had spent hours debating in the council chamber. Half demanded immediate war, claiming that death with honor was preferable to submission. The other half insisted on complete surrender, arguing that survival trumped pride. But Silvara knew both options led to the same destination, the end. Of the Veltari Empire as a free civilization, a soft chime announced an arrival. Captain Hyunwoo entered the chamber, flanked by 2 guards, his hands still bound, but his expression calm and observant. Silvara had requested this private meeting against all protocol, and now faced the being who represented everything her species feared. "Your Majesty," Hyunwoo said with a respectful nod, "I understand you wanted to speak with me before I return to my ship." Silvara dismissed the guards with a gesture, leaving herself alone with the human. For a moment, the 2 beings studied each other across the vast chamber. The towering alien queen and the small human captain who had unknowingly shattered an empire's confidence. "Do you know what you are?" Silvara asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Hyunwoo tilted his head thoughtfully. "I'm the explorer captain from Earth. At least that's what I thought I was until I met your people." "No." Silvara moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing an ancient crystalline data core. "You are something far more significant, though. I suspect you don't realize it yet." The data core activated, filling the chamber with holographic images of the ancient past. Hyunwoo watched in fascination as scenes of vast space battles played out around them, showing creatures that looked remarkably similar to humans fighting against beings that were clearly Veltari ancestors. "These are the Forbidden Archives," Silvara explained. "Records of the Great Dying when beings called the Voidbringers nearly erased my species from existence. For millions of years, we believed they had vanished completely." "But they didn't vanish," Hyunwoo said quietly, understanding, beginning to dawn in his eyes. "They became us. Your species carries their knowledge in your very genes. Every strategic choice your people make, every expansion pattern, every technological development follows paths laid down by the Voidbringers. You are their inheritors, whether you know it or not." The holographic display shifted to show current star maps, overlaying human settlements with ancient Voidbringer positions. The match was perfect, undeniable. "So what happens now?" Hyunwoo asked. "Do you see us as enemies returning to finish what we started?" Silvara was quiet for a long moment, studying this human who could have been her species' destroyer, but spoke with such genuine concern. "That depends entirely on what humanity chooses to become. The Voidbringers of old were conquerors who showed no mercy, but you and your people disabled our entire fleet without killing a single warrior. You could have taken whatever you wanted, but you only asked for one man's freedom. We're not the same species that fought your ancestors," Hyunwoo said firmly. "Humans have learned different lessons. We prefer cooperation to conquest. Which is exactly why I'm making you an offer that has never been made in the history of the Veltari Empire." Silvara moved closer, her compound eyes reflecting the dancing lights of the holograms. "Alliance? Alliance? My empire still controls vast regions of space along the galactic rim. We know of threats emerging from the dark spaces between galaxies, ancient beings that make both our species look like children. The Veltari will serve as your early warning system, your scouts and guardians against these coming dangers." Hyunwoo considered this carefully, and in return, protection, technological advancement, partnership instead of conquest. Silvara's voice carried both hope and desperation. "Your people could take everything we have by force. Instead, I'm asking you to accept everything we offer freely." "You're not surrendering," Hyunwoo realized. "You're proposing to join us." "I'm proposing that the Veltari Empire become humanity's shield, while humanity becomes our teacher. Your species has forgotten the art of war through cruelty, but you've mastered the science of winning through wisdom. Perhaps you can teach my people the same transformation." The chamber fell silent as Hyunwoo absorbed the magnitude of what was being offered. An entire galactic empire, choosing to align itself with humanity not through defeat, but through recognition of what humans had become. "I'll need to discuss this with my superiors," he said finally. "Of course. But Captain—" Silvara's voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. "Your species evolved from destroyers into protectors. Perhaps there's room in the galaxy for both predator and prey to become something better together." As the guards returned to escort Hyunwoo back to the transfer bay, Queen Silvara remained alone with her ancestors' ghosts, having chosen a path that would either save her empire or damn it forever. The crystalline document rested on the ceremonial table between two species, its surface etched with agreements that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. Queen Silvara's primary claws trembled slightly as she pressed them against the signing surface, officially marking the compact of stars with the royal seal of the Veltari Empire. Admiral Jin Ho stood across from her, having materialized aboard, the flagship through some transportation technology that the Veltari couldn't even begin to understand. The human commander's expression was serious but kind, as she added her own signature to the historic document. "Your Majesty," Jin Ho said quietly, "I want you to know that humanity takes this alliance seriously. We understand the courage it took to make this choice." Silvara's compound eyes met the Admiral's steady gaze. "I hope your species proves worthy of the trust we're placing in you. The Veltari have never served another power willingly. And we've never had allies with your strength and knowledge of the Outer Rim. This partnership benefits both our peoples." The signing ceremony was brief, witnessed only by a handful of officials from both species. Too much pomp would have made. It seemed like a surrender rather than an alliance. When it was finished, Admiral Jin Ho and Captain Hyunwoo returned to their fleet, leaving Silvara alone with the weight of her decision. Now, hours later, she stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the human fleet prepare for departure. The 12 vessels hung in space like sleeping predators, their elegant designs hiding devastating capabilities that still made her shell crawl with remembered fear. "My queen," High Advisor Morketh approached cautiously. "The noble houses are requesting audience. They have concerns about the new arrangement." "Let them come," Silvara replied without turning from the viewport. "They'll need to understand that their pride nearly cost us everything. Some are calling it surrender by another name. Some are fools." Silvara's voice carried the authority of absolute certainty. "Do you know what I learned today, old friend? That there are fates worse than death and gifts more valuable than victory." The human fleet began to move, their ships flowing into formation with that impossible grace that defied physics. Silvara watched them prepare to jump to hyperspace, taking with them the knowledge that the Veltari Empire now served as humanity's watchers on the galactic frontier. "They could have taken everything," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Our worlds, our people, our very existence. Instead, they chose to make us partners. Do you understand what that means?" Morketh shifted uncomfortably. "That humans are more merciful than our ancestors believed? That humans are more dangerous than our ancestors ever imagined?" Silvara finally turned from the viewport, her massive form radiating a calm that hadn't been there hours before. "A species that destroys enemies can be fought, understood, predicted. But a species that transforms enemies into allies, that shows mercy from a position of absolute power, that's a force of nature, not just a military threat." The human fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving only the faintest ripple in space-time to mark their passage. Silvara felt something settle in her chest, not the absence of fear, but the transformation of terror into something useful. "Summon the science cast," she commanded. "We have work to do. If we're going to serve as humanity's early warning system, we need to understand threats that could challenge beings with their capabilities. My queen, the galaxy is vast, Morketh. If humans are the inheritors of the Voidbringers, then somewhere out there are the things that made the Voidbringers hide among the stars until they could evolve into something stronger. We need to find these threats before they find humanity." The realization hit Morketh like a physical blow. The alliance wasn't just about protecting the Veltari Empire, it was about protecting the entire galaxy from whatever had been lurking in the darkness while humans grew from destroyers into protectors. "The trembling has stopped," Silvara observed, flexing her claws with renewed purpose. "Not because I'm no longer afraid, but because I've learned to use that fear. Terror can paralyze, or it can sharpen the mind. Today, we choose wisdom." As night cycle began aboard the flagship, Queen Silvara stood alone in her chambers, no longer the same ruler who had trembled before a single human hours earlier. The Veltari Empire had found its new purpose, and in serving humanity, they had perhaps found their own salvation. The galaxy's most feared conquest empire had become its most vigilant guardians, and in the darkness between stars, ancient threats stirred uneasily as they sensed the formation of an alliance that might finally be strong enough to challenge them. In choosing to serve, the Veltari had learned something their ancestors never understood. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from conquering your enemies, but from convincing them to become your friends.